And with that, as I highlighted the importance of equity and all of the work that we've been doing, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Atyia Martin, who will be speaking about the intersection of the 4 priorities of the BSA: architecture, equity, environment, and community. Dr. Martin is the CEO and founder of All Aces, Inc., a racial equity applied learning partner for organizations with a mission to activate consciousness, catalyze critical thinking, and transform capabilities that advance racial equity and build resilience. Dr. Martin is a distinguished senior fellow at Northeastern University's Global Resilience Institute. Her previous professional roles include Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Boston, Director of the Office of Public Health Preparedness at the Boston Public Health Commission, and adjunct faculty in the Master of Homeland Security and Public Policy programs at Northeastern University. So please help me welcome Dr. Atyia Martin.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate you. It's a pleasure to be here with my architect family. I think the most important thing to know about me out of all of those professional parts of my background is that my husband and I have 5 children, 2 still at home, 3 out in the world. And as I always say, they're now somebody else's problem. And really, that has been my greatest learning when it comes to what it means to do good work, what it means to be able to navigate discomfort, to navigate uncertainty, to navigate the ambiguity of the world, volatility. That being a parent really was, and being intentional about acknowledging that those were realities that we had to confront, really helped me to have a different perspective on my professional life, and to be able to integrate them in ways that have been very helpful to me. And how that relates to today is I'm going to talk a bit about the intersection of resilience, of community, racial equity, and social justice, and architecture. And so when I think about why we have struggled so much to kind of figure out what are the things that we need to do to have a more socially just society, to be able to do our work as architects. I'm not an architect, but I'm just like, co-opting your identities right now. That as architects out in the world, really wanting to create beautiful things that support people's quality of life, that contribute to a long-term legacy and impact, and that has amazing design, right? We want all of those things to be true in the world with our work. And so our ability to do that, and to be a proactive disruptor of oppression in the process is really the crux of the work. And really a lot of the discussion that I'm going to go through today connects the dots between our individual roles and responsibilities, who we are as people, how that shows up in the work, how it impacts the way we engage with communities, how it impacts the way that we even approach design and problem solving, and where are some of the opportunities for us to do our work differently, to do better, to be better with how we are not just doing our work, but how we're engaging with each other, how we're engaging with communities, to rehumanize ourselves and each other. So all that said, I'm going to share my screen because I do have a couple of things I'm going to use to keep me on track so that I do not abuse my time here with you all, because you have a lot to talk about beyond me being here today. So that said, I'm going to pull this up very quickly. And that's not even one moment.
And we will be having a question and answer session. So please write your answers in the chat so that we can keep them in order to ask Dr. Atyia during the Q&A.
So you heard our mission earlier, and for All Aces, the work that we do really is mission driven. It's also values driven, and all of those things are contributing to how we want to make impact in our communities and in the organizations that we're partnering with to do our work. So really, we start with this place of hoping that we can have resilient people and organizations with the humanity to foster belonging, with the humility to learn, and the hope to envision a more racially equitable world. This is our vision, and our mission that you heard earlier really directly contributes to that, which is to um, make sure that we are advancing consciousness, catalyzing critical thinking, and advancing capabilities that help us support racial equity and building resilience. And so I'm not going to go into the weeds on this. I won't, and I'm not going to get in trouble for my business manager. You all are my proof that I showed you this. This is the work that we do in general with clients. And really the thing that we're most excited about right now is our learning community, which really supports our overall core values, our mission, and our vision with our focus on racial equity and resilience. And the fact that we're all struggling with figuring these things out and need community in order to help us. And the more you learn, the more sophisticated that we get in our understanding, the lonelier it can be sometimes to be in real relationship and conversation. And one of the challenges that we know that we have in community, in the spirit of the race series that BSA already has going on, is kind of racism and other forms of oppression. And so I'm jumping into the hard stuff right up front, because the whole point of racial equity and social justice is that there's a problem we're trying to solve for. So if you'll humor me, if you'll put in the chat, what are the most important components of understanding what racism is? How do you define racism? You don't have to have a whole super well thought out definition, but just components. And we're going to do some collective intelligence here, and create a way for us to have a shared understanding. So go ahead and put it in there. Thank you, Laura. You get a virtual gold star for being the first one to put yourself out there. Awareness, that's right. Begins with awareness, even just understanding that we don't know what we don't know, and that we actually have to go on a learning journey. The lack of empathy, right? The fear that comes with it, the lack of equity. And someone said hatred, right? At the extreme end of the spectrum, you see this sense of you can see that sense of hatred, bias, lack of understanding, dehumanizing others. Yes, dehumanization is a huge part of what facilitates oppression, and in this case, racism. Otherness, yes, us having kind of that group think that solidifies our connection to groups that we belong to, in this case, race and ethnicity. And not that that's a problem. The challenge becomes when we are so entrenched in that we can only see the world through the lens of those groups and experiences, and making it harder for us to connect and empathize with one another. Yes, that lack of self-awareness. So in the beginning, someone said self-awareness, and this person is pointing out, Daniel is pointing out that it's a lack of self-awareness. Viewing someone as different based on just one piece of who they are. Yes. So you all can see that when we collectively put our minds together, we can come up with some pretty amazing things. This is why community engagement, this is why collective work and collective action is so powerful, because any one of us may not have felt very confident about our ability to define racism in a way that we would put this, amazing definition together. But collectively, we're able to pull the pieces together and have a very robust set of perspectives on what racism is. And this piece around objectification that Andrea, apologize, but I'm going to say both pronunciations just in case, put in there is really important as well, because it's related to that dehumanization piece. And so when we talk about racism at All Aces, we talk about all of these pieces and that there are layers to it. Some people have heard of the 4 eyes of oppression. We often talk about layers of oppression because sometimes when we think of them as these boxes separate from one another, it's harder to see how they create a system, how all of these things overlap on top of one another. And so to begin with, racism is a historically rooted, right? It's very historically rooted set of dehumanizing ideas, right? Which is at the center of everything. The ideas are ground zero. That is the foundation. Everything is built on top of the ideas. And the ideas are centered around Black, Indigenous, and other people of color not having power, and this idea that there's some inferiority there, that it's innate. And most of us don't think these things consciously, but we've been exposed to these constant ideas our whole lives. And through the media, through friends, family, others. And what's important, the most important pieces are that we oftentimes don't realize how we've internalized those ideas, right? And how they influence the way that we think about the world, think about ourselves, think about other people, think about communities that we're working with. And in absence of knowing that, what we do is we engage with each other based on these ideas, right? We've internalized them. We see ourselves a certain way. We see other people a certain way. We engage with each other. And in the process of engaging with each other, we are using these flawed ways of seeing each other that perpetuate the inequities. And then all 3 of those things, the ideas, the internalization, the interpersonal interaction, show up in organizations. They show up in our firms, in our businesses. And then when people talk about structural, what they're really talking about is all of the different institutions that that BIPOC have to engage with, that create this structured set of experiences that reinforces racism, oppression, and reinforces the experiences. Now, the other part is that racism is one of those things, and all forms of oppression are really limiting to all of us, in the sense that it tries to put all of us in a box. People of color, BIPOC are supposed to be over here, and white people are supposed to be over here with these types of traits and characteristics. And in the process, we're all struggling with our identity and who we are and who we want to be and how we want to show up in the world. So being able to redefine this is very important. And when we think about racial equity, we're really talking about kind of how we unlearn some ideas, how we learn more about how human nature, why we do what we do, how we've been impacted, and being able to then decide for ourselves that piece I mentioned earlier. Who do we want to be as individuals, as institutions? How do we want to engage with each other? All of these things are built on top of values. All of these things are built on top of a clear vision of who we want to be in this world. And when I say who, I'm talking about institutions as well, our organizations. And we have the ability to help create spaces in an organization that help facilitate folks showing up as their best self. Why is this important to how we engage with the community? Because our internal organizational dysfunction leaves the organization and seeps into the community, right? So when we're not doing this work internally as individuals, when we're not doing this work in our organizations, we go into communities and we bring all that not our best selves with us into the community. When we haven't started doing this work. Doesn't mean you're ever a finished product. I'm not a finished product, constant work in progress. And I live and breathe with all the research, nerdy stuff, the experiences, the doing work with organizations. But it's an ongoing journey and process because we're constantly getting bombarded with the ideas that reinforce those unhealthy ideas and boxes that people have been put into, that dehumanization. And what's really important for us in this context is understanding that there's a lot that we can do about this. Now, I know the tendency for us is wanting to run out and kind of save the world, right? We want to save people of color. We want to do all of these amazing things. And that's not a thing that's possible because we cannot save people in that way unless someone's in a burning building, right? What we can do is partner with people. What we can do is own our own roles and responsibilities. And so the whole world of concern around racism and its challenges that it presents really requires us to understand where we can place our energy, our circle of influence to really impact and shift the dynamics. And then this piece around how we allow the external world to drive us can constrain where we can see the possibilities for action. But when we focus on ourselves, our organizations, our networks, it means that we're channeling our energy in more constructive, productive ways, right? And when we do that, the more action we take, law of numbers, right? The more action we take, the more likely we're actually to have some successes. And then when we join with other folks to take strategic action, we actually expand that influence significantly. And the goal here is that we're spending less time as conductors of oppression and more time as active, proactive disruptors of oppression. And so that means for us that we have to shift our thinking to be less autopilot. Right? When we're on autopilot, we know we're not our best selves. And sometimes we're in situations, someone calls us out on the fact that we're on autopilot. They don't say it that way, but they're like, hey, what's going on? And then we finally wake up and we're back in control again. But when we're not intentional about what we're doing, when we're not present and we're not intentional, we're oftentimes passive conductors of oppression versus the opportunities we have to be proactive disruptors. So we won't have time for me to go through this, but you will have a link to this presentation so that you can go through this for yourself. Because even if I did go through it, it's still a lot to digest. And I generally don't put a lot of words on the screen, but these concepts are really important to understand. What are the ways that oppression flows through us, through our organizations? And what are the things that we do as individuals and in organizations that reinforce oppression in ways that we don't mean to? And a lot of times the infrastructure that we've created or the structure we've created in our organizations then reinforces and facilitates that. Now, where I'm going to land with you today, as not to take up too much time, is to point out that racism isn't a thing of the past. I know George Floyd has really awakened a lot of people who weren't paying attention to this, how severe the problems are, but there are a number of articles that have been around for years, for decades. People have been studying this in all different ways. People have been studying it from the perspective of how it directly impacts communities. People have been studying it in a way and looking at health impacts in specific diseases like diabetes. People have been studying it, and even to the point of this is a lot of nerdy stuff. So the translation is, this is a study about people's lives, the years of life lost. And the telomere is a part of your RNA, which is part of your DNA, that shows how many years have been worn by the ways that we've been living our lives. And they've been able to look at DNA and see the differences in how many years of life are lost for in this particular study, African American men. And there's some hope in terms of our ability to shift and adjust how we engage with the world and how we do things differently in order to reduce those impacts. Heart attacks, right? People have been studying how racism actually is leading to increases in heart attacks for people of color, particularly Black people. And then this whole idea of, well, what should we be doing about all this stuff? You know, these ideas have been thrown around about cultural competency and, you know, shouldn't we be doing that? And there's been questions about whether or not that's effective and if that facilitates more, because basically saying you could do a training and learn everything you need to know about culture in people's lives. And then this last couple of pieces are really about the psychological impacts that actually there have been for decades, people lobbying to see racism as an explicit form of trauma listed in the official diagnostic book that psychologists use. Same thing here. in the types of strategies that people need in order that they're constantly calibrating in order to address the types of interactions that happen when it comes to racism and racial equity. So here's where I'm going to land for you all, which is how do we do this differently, right? So we talked about the internal, as individuals, how we show up matters, and our ability to manage ourselves better, our ability to collectively in organizations think differently about how we approach the work. What you see on the left-hand side of your screen are partnership opportunities, which are different ways of thinking about the processes that we usually go through when we're engaging on projects. So how the problem that our clients are asking us to solve for, that the client has a problem definition, and if it involves community, making sure that we're engaging with the community around making sure that that's actually the full context for the problem that you're going to be spending all this time on engaging in. And then the actual engagement process, that's usually where we tend to focus on, getting people to weigh in on the project, and there's opportunities for that to be a different dynamic as well, where we can really spend more time looking at how we actually go through the process in a way that there's some decision making and all the ideas haven't been fully baked, that people actually have a voice because they're the context experts. Contracting for equity, as we're going through the process, that we're actually be paying attention to how we're spending our money as organizations when we're in community, even if we're doing virtual work. How do we make sure that we're spending money in the communities that we're actually doing projects in? Doing a burdens benefit analysis to make sure that we understand what are the burdens that the community might have to take on because of this initiative, this project, and we're making sure that they're also, and that we mitigate those things and change things as we need to, but also what are the benefits that are available for folks to really do this work well? What are the benefits that we make sure that the community has access to? What are the alternatives? I mentioned that, the equitable distribution of the benefits. So once the project is finished, that we know that folks, we've actually done that analysis to make sure that folks are benefiting from the project, that the actual implementation of the project ensures that people, BIPOC and other underestimated communities, groups are part of the process of implementing the project, the building, construction, all those pieces. And then evaluation, who gets to decide if it was actually a good thing, right? We generally come up with our own metrics, right? However, the challenge becomes ultimately it's the community is going to be engaging with our projects. And so how do we make sure that the community is part of the evaluation process of if this thing was actually good, not just the final product, but the process as well. So I'm going to stop there because I tried to cover a lot in a little bit of time. And someone said, how do I feel about sharing the articles? Absolutely. Please share the articles with folks because although I'll warn all of you, because they're those peer-reviewed articles, they are not written for real people, and you spend a lot of time translating. So I'll share the PowerPoint. I'll also share the articles. And then for one of them, it's really, really jargony and technical. So I'll send the supporting, there's a summary of it that's in English that I'll send to you as well. So thank you all very much for allowing me to be a part of your morning today. And I went a little bit over, and now it's time for us to do some Q&A is what I was told.
Yes, and please put your questions on the chat, and then we can get through them. I have a quick question about when you're saying evaluation and creating metrics. Do you have any suggestions for how to create these metrics and what you're looking for besides making, how do we, in the sense for the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Task Force, trying to create support and education and and advocacy, but also how to measure these things to see and have accountability for them. Do you have any suggestions for how we can do that?
A few. So if we're talking about the internal organizations, that's a co-created thing, right? Like we actually spend time collectively in an organization talking through what are our goals, who do we want to be? Because for each organization, it's going to be different. And then being able to map whatever we say is important to us to ways that we're going to measure that. And it's not always quantitative data, right? There's going to be a lot of qualitative data because that really gets into the how, right? The quantitative tells you what, like there's this thing that's happening, but the qualitative stuff, the community engagement, I mean, and when I say community engagement in an organization, we're talking about the employee experience, employee engagement. Externally, it's similar, but there's more of a foundation you can start with, right? And so being able to leverage some of the surveys that have been done, quality surveys, that there's some nonprofits who do a really good job of when they deliver services to clients, the follow-up survey that they do really does a good job of capturing both quantitative and qualitative information that helps them understand whether or not folks got what they needed and whether or not the experience of engaging with the process or with the organization actually was respectful of their dignity and who they are. And so being able to kind of have both of those components in there. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's really helpful. So that's, you said that's more internal, but for the community, or for the external.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't do the
No,
clean
no, this
pivot.
is good. This is,
Yeah, so the clean pivot was when it said when it comes to community, is when I was referring to the nonprofit survey, right? So that those are good ones to look at, and there's a couple of, I think, promising ones, particularly promising ones, that do that good balance of, if you're in community and you're trying to figure out if your process went well, being able to have both those types of measures that are quantitative, but also qualitative, in the sense that that's where I was talking about kind of like the dignity piece, where did people feel respected in the process? And did they feel like the process actually worked, that it went well? And that there are some great resources out there for those. And I'm happy to share those as well. That might take me a little longer because I'll have to read through them to make sure I get you some good ones, but we'll get you some examples there. I'm just writing it down because I have to.
oh, and then another question that I have, and please others write questions here, is, it's easy to engage those who want to change and who are looking for education and for all of that. It's difficult for those that are not even aware that they need to change, or that their organization needs to change, and don't understand that, including, municipalities and other
Mm.
locations, right? And firms. And how do you engage situations where people don't understand that they're not part of the change, or they don't understand that they need that there is an issue or need to change?
Yeah, I might reframe it a little bit to be more about how all of us have work to do to evolve and change. And then when we think about it from that perspective, then it allows us to have a little bit more empathy for folks who haven't had the, dare I say, privileges of learning and building their, not just their knowledge, but their skills around how to navigate in these different spaces. And I didn't really talk about the skills, but the specific skills that are really important are number one, racial equity literacy and social justice literacy, understanding what racism is, how it works, the historical context, especially in urban design and planning. There's a ton of history that we don't learn in school. And if we didn't learn it in school and we never sought it out because we didn't know to seek it out because we didn't know it was there, then we just don't know. And most of us don't actually know that historical context that helps us to connect the dots between why today looks the way it does. And then the other few I'll quickly mention are emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, social management, or relationship management, communication, our ability to communicate with ourselves, our ability to communicate with other people, and the in that communication piece, making sure that we understand that two-way street, the listening part is a skill, and how we communicate is a skill, and that we're doing it in a way that's caring but also authentic, and honest. The other one is conflict management. Our ability to stop avoiding conflict, because it's actually a clarifier. It helps us get closer to each other when we go through conflict. If we think about the folks who are closest to us in our lives, we pretty much had a lot of conflict with them. And we're in a place where we actually can interact with each other in ways where we don't have to tiptoe around one another and all those things, because we know this. I know that these things upset this person, and I know these other things don't. And in organizations is particularly important. And the last one is critical thinking, our ability to have a process to manage our thinking and our decision making, that we're clear about why we're making decisions, and having a process and learning that as a skill. So when we think about how we approach others, from the perspective of making sure that we meet them where they are, right? And that everyone is on a spectrum. And some of us, including myself, can be at different places on that spectrum, depending on the day and time of day and what I just got exposed to and those types of things. Someone asked a question, and I want to make sure I get to, who sent it to me privately, in terms of the process. How do I recommend that businesses provide ongoing engagement with the discussion of these issues within the business? And I think part of the challenge, and thank you for that question, and I won't say who the person is because they asked me privately. Part of the challenge is that we tend to think of this work as something separate, almost as an extracurricular activity over here, and then the work is over here, when we have to bring those things together, because how we do the work is in essence the things we need to do to advance racial equity and social justice in the workplace, right? So our ability to look at what we're doing to see how far we are away from who we want to be, getting clearer about that, but then doing that delta, what's the difference between the two? And then that gives us a shared conversation that we can be in on an ongoing basis, that is structured, that is helpful, but also is focused on action and holding ourselves and each other accountable. Because a lot of times we will have the sense that we want to create spaces for people to sit around talking, and that's important. And as an organization, you'll also notice that people want action. They want to see some things moving. And the way to combine the two is to have these focused conversations on shifting the dynamics in the organization, and doing that collectively as a team, as an organization, within our units, within organizations. And then the last, there are several more, and I know we're running out of time. How much time do we have left?
I think we just ran out.
We just ran out.
But I think what this is saying is that we need to have you back.
Well, I am happy to come back. I appreciate you all. And, I'll end just by saying that this work is hard. There's nothing easy about it. I wish there was an equation or an easy button I can give each and every one of you to make all of this happen. But really, the hard work of it really is really, and I'm going to say this again, really about finding ourselves in all of this, right? Like, if we're not able to look in the mirror as individuals, collectively in organizations, we're not really going to have the kind of transformational impact that we need, because it's easier to look at everybody else, and that's our default. But our ability to sit in that mirror and really do that work, that's how we have that kind of transformational kind of collective impact when we commit to doing those things. So thank you all for having me, and thank you for allowing me to go over just a little bit.